When people think about budget travel, they usually think about backpacking and just being cheap. But I think of budget travel as frugal travel.
Is budget travel still accessible in 2025? And what are some of the best ways to save money while abroad? These are the questions we are going to answer as I'm joined today by budget travel expert Matt Kepnes. In 2005, Matt took a trip to Thailand that inspired him to come home, quit his job, and backpack around the world for a year. 3 years later, he founded nomadicmatt.com to help others travel better, cheaper, and longer, helping millions of people a year realize their own travel dreams. In 2012, he published his first book, How to Travel the World on $50 a Day, which has now been updated for 2025. He also has published his memoir, 10 Years a Nomad, about his decade backpacking the world. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining me. I'm excited to be chatting about budget travel because you are clearly the expert in it. So let's start with the biggest question then on people's mind. Is budget travel still accessible in 2025, or has it just become way more challenging?
It's definitely harder. Prices have gone up. That's just the reality of life. I mean, especially post-COVID, as a lot of companies try to recover the debt they incurred, the losses they've incurred. More people are out, so there's more demand, which means there's less incentive to lower prices. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. There are still ways to travel on a budget. There's still tons of sharing economy websites. Facebook groups have become super huge. Points and miles for flights. There's now budget airlines that go from North America to Japan, so you can get across Asia on a budget. Is it as good as it was in like the late 2000s, early 2010s? No. But is it impossible? Definitely not.
I mean, obviously, everyone's dollar is a little bit more stretched nowadays, so I'm excited to hear that. Let's talk about misconceptions that other people might have about budget travel. What are some of those that you see?
Yeah, when people think about budget travel, they usually think about backpacking and just being cheap. They think, oh, I'm going to end up in like the back of the bus in like Z class in the last row, sitting on a cart. I'm going to stay in a 60-bed hostel dorm. I'm going to be eating ramen. They think of it as like, okay, they're going to save money, but they're not going to have anything fun to do. So it's like, what's the point, right?
Do you think that's just like media's image of budget travel that's just kind of been perpetuated? Like that's the because like that's the ultra budget travel.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's between movies and media and the news, we think of budget travel as what kids do when they're younger, which is what I just described. When you're a broke college student, you're eating ramen, you're taking the cheapest bus, you're connecting 5 times on your flight to save $15, right? But I think of budget travel as frugal travel. It is really just about not overspending and making sure you get the best deal without sacrificing your comfort or your desires,
So what are some other ways that you could balance budget travel with comfort and convenience? So like for us 30-year-olds or beyond that don't want to do those ultra budget things that we would have done in our 20s.
Well, since I'm in the beyond age group you just listed.
It's all right. I'll be there soon too.
For me, I used to sleep in dorm rooms, but now I like a comfortable bed. So, but I don't need like 5 stars because I'm only there for 8-9 hours a day. And so for me, I like 2-3 star places are great. So I'm thinking about guest houses and budget hotels. We're using points for hotels and then spending that money on food. For me, dining out, activities, walking tours, food tours, that's where I want to spend a lot of my money. So I am that friend that's like, it's not far, we can walk. And that walk is like 1 hour long, right? I'm always about taking public transportation. As you think of like, how much money do I need for a trip? How much is this going to cost me? Where do I save? Think about like what it is you really, really want to do. And then prioritize spending that way, and then just be ruthless on everything else you don't care about.
What would you say is the number one mistake then that people make when they're trying to travel on a budget?
Lack of research. When you and I were beginning to travel, there were no blogs. was one of the first. You were one of the first YouTubers, right? There wasn't a lot of information out there. I was still planning my trip with guidebooks. I had a stack before I left, and you go to forums. But nowadays, there is a vlog, an Instagram reel, a TikTok, for anything you want to do in any place you want to go. No place is like really that undiscovered these days. So if you're caught off guard about how much things cost, it's because you didn't really look it up online. Because if you're like, I'm going to go to France and I have $3,000, and you get there, and you're like, wow, I can't afford all this stuff, my accommodation is too much, or I spent too much on my flight. Well, you didn't do any proper research. So I think where people go wrong is they don't utilize the fact that everything is available to you online.
So let's talk some specifics now. What would you say are some of your best tips for saving money on airfare or accommodation? So one of those two.
For both of them, I would really look at points and miles, right? If you can collect hotel points and credit card points and airline miles, that's definitely going to offset your costs, right? And, the American market for that is the largest in the world, but the Canadian market is also the second largest in the world. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to do that. If you're not in one of those markets and you're like, well, yeah, I would love to sign up for a credit card and get 80,000 points and fly to Europe for free, but I can't. For flights, it's really just about being flexible. The difference of a day can be the difference of hundreds of dollars. So if you are like dead set to go to Paris, like try to go off season, like in the fall or the spring, not the summer when everyone else wants to go. But if you're like, hey, I can only travel when the kids are out of school, so we can only go somewhere in the summer. Okay, well maybe don't go to like Rome when everyone else is going to Rome. Find like a different part of Europe, like if you have to go in the summer. Flexibility is really the key if you can't use points or miles. For accommodation, they don't vary as much price-wise. Obviously, if you're going peak season, it is higher than if you're going in low season. But if you go July 4th versus July 5th to Rome, it's not going to be like hundreds of dollars of difference. For accommodation, there's not a lot of options beyond points. There's a service called Rakuten, Rakuten. It's a browser extension, and oftentimes they give you extra cash back on hotels.com or booking.com. So that's a way to sort of leverage, maybe 5 to 10% extra off, trying to stay out of like major city centers. If you do want to stay in a hotel, that's probably your only options. But if you're more flexible, hostels are inexpensive. You can stay with people through websites like Couchsurfing or Be Welcome, or post-COVID, Facebook groups have become a great way to meet other travelers and to find hosts and people to hang out with when you're in the city. And this is a part of the fact that during COVID, all these like Couchsurfing and similar websites paywall themselves. A lot of people didn't want to pay. So they kind of went back to Facebook for this stuff, which is kind of ironic because we think of Facebook as the place for, boomers. I used them last summer, 2024, when I was in Europe, in multiple cities to like meet locals and hang out with people.
I guess that's the nice thing about Facebook specifically, is that like it is so global that it's not as region specific. Like, let's talk regions then. Are there any specific regions or cities that you would say going into 2025 that are like the best for stretching your dollar, like currency specific aside? So like obviously the US dollar is really strong right now, so your dollar is going to go a little further in other areas, but like that aside, any areas that are like, that's a cheap place to travel to in general?
It's really the same places as before. Southeast Asia reigns supreme as like a very affordable place to travel. Eastern Europe, like $75 a day. Southeast Asia, around 50 or a little less. Central America, around 50. Taiwan is a really affordable place to travel. And Japan can be quite affordable thanks to the currency issues they have at the moment. And if you like stick to a bunch of like really local places and maybe take the bus over the high-speed train, you can do in Japan pretty affordably.
That's true. I guess when I was talking about currency, I was talking more about your currency
Yeah.
as a traveler, like where you're coming from versus
Right.
like the city's or the country's currency and how it's doing right now.
If the yen is down across the board, that is going to work for you if you're coming from Europe or Canada or the US or Australia, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the Indian rupee at the time we're talking is quite bad. And, India itself was always an affordable destination. You could do it really cheaply, but you can do it even cheaper now thanks to the fact that the rupee is down across all currencies. So, but think about like what country is like currency is like really down right now, right? Because it's not going to be down just against the dollar. It's going to be down against everyone.
What about hidden fees or other unnecessary costs? Are there any ways that people can avoid those that you know of?
Obviously one of the best ways to save on bank fees is to use a credit card because that will get to the best exchange rate possible. But when it comes to ATM fees, there are a few cards in Europe, a couple of companies in Canada that don't charge withdrawals, but they might not reimburse you if you get charged a withdrawal. In the U.S., Charles Schwab is the best bank forecast because they don't charge ATM fees, and if you get charged an ATM fee, they will reimburse you that fee. So they are my favorite bank to use because I never pay any fees. I would consider, looking at what your options are in the country you are. Always use a credit card. Always, when they give you the pad, make sure you're paying in local currency. Never like change it to your own because you're going to get the worst rate possible. If you do have cash that you need to exchange for the local currency, try to do so outside the airports. Those are all middlemen, right? So like the closer you get to the source, which is like a big bank, the better off the rate's going to be.
So I have this little gem with me, How to Travel the World on $50 a Day. So this was your previous version of your book that has now been updated to $75 a day. Let's talk about that. Why $75 up from $50?
So much of travel has changed post-COVID that I really wanted something that was more up to date. A lot of companies went under during COVID. A lot of methods for saving money don't exist anymore. New methods, we just talked about those Facebook groups. Walking tours, like, are pretty much everywhere these days. Like, free walking tours are, like, really, really popular. Like, whereas they used to be kind of the domain of, like, big cities or Europe. Like, I was in Peru in November, and there wasn't a city I didn't go to that didn't have a free walking tour. And so, just so much had changed in the travel landscape beyond prices.
Yeah.
That I really wanted a book that reflected the best strategies and tips travelers could use today to navigate the current travel world.
So where did the $75 specifically come from? So like, you could travel on $75?
On average, right? I basically took the original trip in the 50-day book and I just adjusted for inflation. There are still regions around the world where you can do 50. In the first book, I think it was like $35 a day for Southeast Asia. Now it is $50 a day, whereas India is like $40 a day. But like if you're going to be in Australia, you're probably going to look at, and these prices are all USD, 100-ish, maybe a little over per day. How we save money on food, accommodation, activities in a destination, it doesn't matter the length of time you're there because it's all the same. The 75 is like, okay, if you're going for like your traditional year around the world, multi-month trip, here's how much you'll need on average. The book is really about the strategies and tactics you need to use to get an affordable trip without sacrificing comfort.
I mean, I think that's useful, like you said, for everybody, regardless if they're taking that crazy big 3-month whatever backpacking trip, or if they are just going for that's their 1 or 2 week vacation.
A lot of people get hung up on the 75 because they're like, oh, I'm not backpacking around the world. Yeah. That's like, okay, but we all have to find cheap flights, right? Yeah. We all want to not overpay for meals when we get to that destination. We want to find the free tours and, the cool attractions that, aren't $50 to get into. And so all that all that advice is in there to get you into the mindset of like, how do I go to any destination and have a great time without spending all my money?
Yeah, no, I think that's super helpful for anybody. So like now that you did all this research, what is one unexpected way that people can save money when traveling that they wouldn't think of? That you're like, oh, it's interesting.
An unexpected way is to ask a certain question. And that question is, where do you eat? As travelers, we often say, hey, like, where should I go eat for lunch, right? And then that person you're asking, that local, might be like, I don't know, where do people eat these days? And so you might get the hot places, the trendy places, the touristy places. But if you flip that around and say, where do you eat for lunch around here? You're asking that person specifically, where do they go when they're on break or off work? And they're going to go to some local spot that's going to be affordable. And so knowing to ask that question, or even like taxi drivers, right? Make a ton of money as taxi drivers. So they're going to eat at pretty like hole in the wall kind of places. Here in New York, a lot of them come from, Africa, Pakistan, India. So like you ask them like, where do they eat? You're going to get amazing African, Indian, Pakistani food.
I love that. I think that's a really good tip. I never would have thought of that.
So just turn that question around and ask them what they do, and rather than like, what should I do?
If someone wants to travel more and feels like they can't afford it, where should they start?
Keep track of your budget for a month, right? A lot of people don't track their spending. We think we track our spending, but it's like, do you literally write down everything you spend money on? Chances are you do not. If you bought a bottle of water with $1, make sure you mark that down. And do so for a month and see where your money is going. Because chances are there's probably some low-hanging fruit you can probably just get rid of. Turns out you do spend a lot of money per day on coffee. You do eat out more than you need to. You can really get a sense of like, where does your money go? And from there you can say, okay, what can I really cut? And it doesn't have to be like a lot, Start a savings account that you just put in a few bucks. If you can cut $5 a day, every day put that $5 into your savings account. And whether it's 2 months or 2 years, eventually you'll get to where you need to go. Then you can start from the low-hanging fruit to like the semi-harder hanging fruit that might require a lifestyle change. But you can never make those other steps if you first don't know, like, where does the money I make now go?
I think that's very smart. So thank you, Matt. This has been amazing. Where can people find you online, and where can people order the book?
I'm everywhere at Nomadic Matt. Nomadicmatt.com is the website. Nomadic Matt on social media. The book, How to Travel the World on $75 a Day, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores. It's available in Canada, and digital copies outside of North America.
And on what date?
March 25th, 2025.
Oh, okay, perfect. So it should already be available then when this airs. I'll leave links down below so you guys can find Matt. You can you can order his book. And and hopefully you guys will save a lot of money. I'm sure that you will save the cost of the book on any trip that you take. Literally one trip, you'll probably pay for the cost of the book. So
guarantee it.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you wanted to know some of my best tips on booking cheap flights, you're going to want to watch this video right here.